Good morning. It is 10:30 a.m. It is Sunday, and that means it is time for Sunday Club, which is a weekly Ruby on Rails live stream where each week we do some Ruby on Rails coding and we build an application together and we move that application forward a little bit. And the application that we are working on is an event registration and ticketing application. And the idea is that eventually it will handle, we'll build a real site and ship it to a real domain, and it will handle people organizing events and those who want to take part, and especially those who want to take part in groups. And we work on it for a couple of hours, hour and a half each week, and move forward at a very slow pace because we just poke around Rails and things I find interesting and just things that are going on. Up front, every week we normally deal with follow-up. And there isn't any. I haven't taken a look at this week, so we're just going to dive back in straight where we left off last week, and let's do it. Let's not hang around any further. Let's change our screen over, and let's dive in. So, what have I called this week's video? Email, but not the mechanics of the ESP or anything else. We're going to talk about actually sending the email in our code. And I'm going to pause for just 1 second because I'm going to lean over and turn this fan on. The UK is going through a heat wave this weekend and into early next week. And as I mentioned last week, I know many of you live in other countries around the world. The UK is not prepared for either cold weather or hot weather. So we get totally bamboozled when the weather is anything other than, a few degrees above zero and rain. Those are really the only two scenarios that we can handle. And even then it floods a lot here as well. So I've turned the fan on. So if the audio is a little bit, if you can hear the fan in the background, I apologize, but you got to do it. It's too hot today otherwise. Okay. So in the previous two videos available in the YouTube archive, just Google Sunday Club on YouTube, we looked at the considerations around choosing an email service provider, an ESP service, and using that with a Rails application. And we looked at then getting it up and running. We looked at secure credentials in Rails because previously I had used like .env and other mechanisms for local API keys and sharing them with other engineers and things like that. And that was my first dive into the built-in secured credential encrypted credentials within Rails. That was great, worked really well. And we last week got the ESP up and running. So we used MailJet, which is one of the few ESPs, again, that's email service providers, that has a free tier. And so it's still limited. It has like a daily cap, but I think you can send thousands of emails a month for free, and it's capped to about 200 a day. The idea being that they want you to use the service for free, and then you bump into the limit and have to give them some money, which seems totally reasonable to me. And so we wired that up, and the emails were coming through to my phone. We got the domains all authorized and did all of that stuff. But the only way we did that in our actual code was just to spoof the email sender. I think I was just calling the code either from the console, or I think we used Devise actually. So I think we just had created a password reset or something like that, and Devise would send the email that handled the actual mailer. So the email that we spoofed was our order confirmation email. So we had this order mailer, and then we created an email called order confirmation, and we just hard coded the email address of the recipient. That's just as a demo. And so we then had a corresponding view here, which just had a very high-tech email that just said order confirmed, which was great. So it arrived. The ESP worked, and we got our emails, and all was well with the world. So we talked a little bit at the end of last week's video around the actual delivery of that. And I want to touch on two things, which is patterns for... I guess we're really talking about the pub sub pattern, but like patterns. Let's talk about patterns for sending emails in or triggering emails to be sent from your application, I guess, and considerations around that. And then I want to talk about something that I think is probably going to be a bit more fun, which is actually the local development gems from emails, because they're my favorite, because I love the ones where you get a little fake inbox, because I like that. So we'll do that second. So what I talked about last week is something, whenever I've gone to boot camps and things like that, or run through tutorials with learners and things like that, you sort of end up, and this, I'm not saying that this is a bad thing at all, but one of the sort of initial approaches that you often get to something like an email, and it's more to demonstrate callbacks, I think, is the idea of having something like a callback on a model that's like send, okay, I'm off center here, send confirmation email, and this would then, I guess, you could just do this, like, what's it called? Order confirmation, and maybe you pass through like, yeah, something like this. I don't know, something like that, and then you could put return unless confirmed. Yeah, we don't have this API, so this is just dummy code. But then you could have something here like a callback that was like after save or something like that. What is it after save? I think that's a syntax, but it doesn't matter. This is just dummy. So what this would do is every time that we save the order, we would look and say, am I confirmed? And maybe you would have something in here that's like status recently changed or something, like some other mechanism in here. You're basically saying, work out whether I should be sending a confirmation email based on the fields and what's happening to me, the order model. And if that's the case, send the model. And that logic is performed after every save. The problem that you end up with here is that the logic around this line, so this could be, I can't remember the dirty API syntax. It's like, it's something like this. I can't remember what it is, but we don't actually have order status, I don't think. But there'd be a field called status, and you're just checking to see if it's changed recently, and am I confirmed? So this logic gets more and more complicated as your order starts to do more things, or you add new states, or it's confirmed, but it moves out to, customer support issue, and then moves back to confirmed when the support issue is changed. You don't know what it's going to be. But there are all these edge cases that you end up working around. So while this is a really valid mechanism for sort of highlighting how callbacks work, and email is like a neat way to start that conversation, it's actually pretty rare that I've ever experienced to actually use that as a way of triggering emails or notifications or things like that. You sort of want to disassociate the performing of some sort of user notification with anything that's going on in your models, because they could be doing a bunch of work. All right, so if we don't do that, but that's what we do sort of guide people to in initial tutorials, perhaps. And again, I haven't been to a boot camp since COVID, so like or like Rails Girls and one of those types of events. So I don't know what they're doing now. That might not be the case. They might be kind of approaching that differently. But we want to disassociate those two things. So we have a bunch of options, and as usual, no right and wrong answers. And also, I'm not going to cover all the options. We're just going to skim over some stuff. What you could do is in your... We don't actually have an order confirmations create, do we? We just... I think the creation of the order is the yeah, because this is just at the moment, this is sort of a fairly kind of dummy application. The creation of an order for us is the confirmation of the order for us, because we're only storing an email and a name on it. It's and an event, so there's nothing. Oh, that's for the attendee. Sorry. So an order actually has... What does an order have? Order params. Oh yeah, the event, the name of the person who created the order, and their email address. So we don't have a lot of information in here, so we're just saving it. And if you save it, that's the confirmation of it. Great. But in here, you could put your mailer code. Do we still have that from here? We could take this one. And so this could be here. And this could be order is order. So, and this could be asynchronous, right? Like what is it like deliver later is the default one? Depending on what queue system you're using, I think this could be different things. But you get the gist. That's like, hey, send this email and via some mechanism. So this is like, this would work basically. It would when you save the order, it would come through here. One of the downsides here a little bit is you might end up with mechanisms where you're creating the order in different places with different contexts. So let's say that you then have, this is orders controller, but maybe you have like an admin orders controller. So, and that has like a slightly different set of emails that need to go out, and you maybe at that point you need to send an order to the admin to confirm that they're the ones that created it, or you need to pass an additional param through. I don't know what it would be, but some scenario where you want to perform the same action but in a different controller. So you have to sort of remember to do this, but you're then maintaining the same delivery code in two different places or multiple places, depending on how many times you do it, which is, again, like, maybe that's fine. Maybe you're like, no, this is only ever going to happen in two. We're happy with this, blah, blah, blah. So that's one option. You could also look at sort of the mechanism that I've been Googling around here, which is the idea of a pub sub, or I'm sort of I'll just use pub sub as a shorthand here, because I think I get a little bit, I don't think I always use the correct language around like the type of event patterns and things. I think there's some really specific semantic language around a lot of these, which I'm not great at knowing which one is. So if I'm using pub sub or like publisher subscriber pattern in the wrong context, I do apologize. I'm sort of not always quite clear, because then like event versus message and things like that, I think there are specific meanings around those, and then it's only when I'm actually in that work that I ever really need to be specific about my language, and I always forget what it is. So apologies if I'm getting this all wrong. But anyway, what's that? Like, what is it? Well, I was in this world and I was researching in the half an hour before coming on the stream, because that's how well researched I am. And so what is PubSub? So I didn't look at any of these ones. So basically the idea is here, instead of the line we just had, where you say, hey, send this email, instead you say, I can't remember any of the APIs for this. So you can have broadcast is one that I've used with, I think that's Whisper. Announce is another one. You have like listener announcer, like create event, things like that. Anyway, the API, the specific API doesn't really matter. We'll get into that in a moment. But what you're basically saying here is, hey, this thing happened. I'm broadcasting that out into the ether, or announcing it out into the ether. Hey, this thing happened. And by putting it out there, there's a mechanism that's abstracted away somewhere where that is stored somehow, somewhere, or like listened for somewhere. So you say, so let's use the broadcast one. So you say broadcast, and you say order confirmed, and then maybe you pass a bunch of stuff through. So maybe you pass through order is order. So this looks a little bit like this, because you're set like, this is order confirmation, the email, and this is order confirmed, the action that we're broadcasting, and they're both passing through the order. They're passing through the thing you care about. The main difference here is that this is broadcasting it and allowing the code that listens for this event to decide what to do about it. Here we're saying send an email. Like that's like there's no option here. I'm deciding what's about to happen. It's happening here. Even if it's being pushed into a queue to be performed asynchronously, I'm still deciding what's actually going to happen here. And a pub sub pattern sort of disassociates those two events, which is both. There are trade-offs on that, and I'm going to come to an article I found that I think really does a really good job, actually, of like sort of putting some considerations you would want to make on your radar. Because here you're being really explicit, and you're creating like the simplest version. You're saying this is going to send an email, it's going to send it now. Whether that's the line in the controller, or even if you did have it on a model, you're saying this is what's happening. Here, if you just broadcast something, you're disassociating those two things. So the thing has happened, and then we're going to react to that elsewhere. But you're increasing the complexity of that, because what you're saying to the person reading this code is, hey, this event is being broadcast. You're not telling the reader what's going to happen based on that broadcast. Any number of things could happen. You're just saying, hey, there is an event that's broadcast or announced here that this order is confirmed. That would lead you, the reader, to believe that there are probably subscribers or listeners to this event, and they're probably going to do something, but you don't know what they are unless you've gone to find them separately, and you don't know what they're going to do or unless I give you a mechanism of some sort to go and find them, either in the code, in the docs, something like that. So although we've created a more flexible development system, we have there is additional complexity, because broadcast could be another class in our Rails app. Theoretically, it could be you're going to add an event to like an event bus, and then another service or another application altogether is going to pick it up. So just by reading this one file, you're not necessarily sure what would happen based on that event. But that is both an increase in complexity, but it's also a good thing. Maybe you don't care. You're the reader of this code. You're just like, hey, that's been broadcast. If you care about the behavior of the consumption of that event, or the is consumption the right word? Anyway, and listening for that event, you can go and find that elsewhere. So it's not something necessarily that you have to reach for immediately. You could just send a mail, like just put it in there, like, hey, this is the only place this happens for now. I'm just going to send an email. I'm going to there's a queue system here. We'll check our own resilience somehow. So any kind of event error handling in here, error handling in the queue. What would happen if I need to send this email again? What happens if there's a delay in the queue? All of that stuff you can factor in. You could do that with this line, but again, you could also handle it by processing the event. I hope some of that made some sense. I mentioned last week I want to try and start chopping out some of these little consideration sections, I guess. Like, what are you things to consider when X? And there's loads of good articles around these things, but I think maybe it would be helpful just to have for people to have when they're browsing YouTube. I have no idea. Anyway, let's take a look at what it actually looks like to get one of these going. So where did I find that great article? Here. So this I thought was great. This is an article, and I'm going to put the description of this now in the YouTube video stream. So if anyone is watching this, I'm going to put this in YouTube now. How do where's the element? There we go. I'm doing it on the other screen. So in the YouTube description of this video is a link to this article. Let's save that. And so this is Essential Ruby on Rails Patterns 5, Part 5, PubSub. And it does a really good job of describing the what, the why. So hopefully some stuff I've just touched on. This is way more in depth and way smarter than I broke it down. So renders breaking large tasks down into easier ones. Logging significant events is more easy. In PubSub, events occurring in the system convey lots of comprehensible data that outline what is happening, simplifies data migrations, blah, blah, when to use it. So here is some of the stuff I was just coming on to the end. So when not to use this. So if you're a small to medium-sized application, you're adding that additional complexity but maybe you don't need that. Like you're making life harder for other engineers who might read your code. Scarce amount of domains and modules, that's sort of the same idea, like the complexity. Not integrated with external systems, so if everything is happening in your code base, do you need to go as far as that? Already implemented something alternative. Prototypes that are just experimental, in which case PubSub would just add unnecessary overhead. Nomenclature wording. Yeah, so I mentioned this earlier. So publisher, subscriber, message, topic, message bus, messages, events, subscribers, event handlers, topics, domains, message bus, and broker, and subscriptions. There's a lot of language around PubSub and event-based systems. And like I said, I'm not always great at being exactly using the right one, because if you're talking generally and you're not talking about a specific implementation, I think people could kind of mishear what you were saying because you were using a different type of language. So this article, look at how long this is. This is great. So how do you identify the events that you want to send? So for us, it would be order completed, but look, I've got order notifications sent, door opened, new order received. So they're like a thing has happened. The payload here is what we were discussing around here. So this is order. We're just passing the whole order through here. So this goes back to something we were talking about recently on the stream. No, this might this might have been at work where we were discussing. Oh no, it was for view components. It was for view components. And their doc said pass through 3 individual attributes, and once you tip over that 3 marker, just pass the entire model or thing that you need, and that's sort of a metric you can use. So here you might not need the whole order to render whatever is being acted on order confirmed. You could potentially just pass order number, customer name, something like that, and then eventually build up to needing to pass the whole order, because why pass through more than you need to? You're just potentially leaking data, especially to an external system that you might not then have full control over. You're making it easier for other engineers to build more complexity that you don't realize they're relying on. And then when you change this API, you might pass a versioning attribute. I mean, this is not be a great one, but like you might specify what version of the payload was being broadcast. So then the listener could know what version to react to, and as you introduce different versions of payloads, you could then make it easier for those transitions, rather than having to have them having to have the listeners or the code that was listening to the event react to changes in the payload. I don't even know why I'm describing all this, because I'm sure it's all in this. I only skimmed this article earlier, but it's all like, yeah, this is exactly what I've just been saying. Like, it's like this article says everything that I've just been saying. So, yep. So this is about testing. So you're sort of, whenever I've tested this type of pattern, you're sort of, when you're testing the broadcaster, you're just sort of saying, hey, did this thing broadcast? And then the listeners are, hey, did this thing do the right thing based on the payload I gave it or the event type I gave it? And then there is a higher level test, integration test, or some sort of end-to-end test that tests whether the underlying infrastructure works. So if I publish event X and I have a listener for event X, they behave as I expect. That could be difficult to test if you're working on a fully external system. Maybe you would just check the API request or sent or something like that. But you would determine that based on what you were trying to do. Initially, again, this goes back to the idea of like PubSub or an event pattern potentially being quite complex when you're just doing a little proof of concept or something like that. So if you're finding that you're not confident in being able to test it, maybe it's more than you need, and you could just sort of like back down to, hey, I'm just going to put this line of code here, because you don't need necessarily to move to a pub sub pattern. There's like an interstitial step between moving from, hey, I want to send this email, to, hey, I want to broadcast this thing. You could have a you could just build a class, like not an active record, doesn't need to be an active record class, just a comment, and it could say like an order confirmer, and it could take the order. And well, depending on what pattern, you could use .call, or you could use like .confirm, or whatever you were doing. I guess perform, it could be a job. And this could perform validation. It could do the work of saying, hey, I'm going to send an email, and it could have the checks for any resilience or anything in there that you wanted to do. And then this could be the thing that you drop in everywhere. So this creates a consistent API for you within the order confirmer. But you're not jumping straight to having a pub sub. You're not separating those two out. You're always calling this, and it's sort of handling that. Again, there's trade-offs there as well, because if you want to move that to an external system, or you're still having to maintain. What I was trying to say. So let's say that you had an order confirmer, but you also, based on an order being confirmed, wanted to, I don't know, do something else, like log it or something else. Like, you would then potentially have to have like order confirmation logger, because it's nothing to do with the confirmer. Whereas if they were just triggered by the same event, you can sort of add more listeners that are completely indifferent to each other. One is about logging, one's about sending an email, one's about I don't know, doing something with finance or whatever it is. Whereas if you use this sort of interstitial class, you're calling this in several different places, you would have to come in here and sort of update that. Whereas you could add more listeners outside of where this was being called. I hope that made some sense, but that's worth considering. So this is testing the subscribers to it. One thing that might be confusing at the beginning is a slight reduction in application flow visibility. We no longer see references to all pieces taking part in a given process in one place. This is what we were just talking about earlier, but so much more succinct and clear. So basically, you can't know as the reader necessarily what's going on once that event is called. This is only partially true because this information is visible, but in a different form. You can pretty efficiently recon what is happening in the application just at looking at what events and event handlers you have. So this is it. You're publishing an event here. Do you care about this event in any way? If you're reading the code, you might not. You'd be like, yeah, okay, great, event happens, who cares? And you can just totally abstract and chunk away what would happen over there and carry on. Or you may be like, oh, I care about these, and then you can go and take a look for yourself. So it sort of it's like a choose your own adventure. Okay. When it comes to the actual flow, it's best not to assume any particular order of events processing. Sometimes selected event handlers do depend on other event handlers in terms of the Sometimes selected event handlers do depend on other event handlers in terms of the order of execution, though. So what are the options of controlling the flow if we really need to ensure that given steps are realized, events are processed in a certain order? So this moves away from the idea of the basics of PubSub and into the sequencing of events being handled. An example of this might be finance stuff. So maybe you need to send a request off to some, I don't even know what finance systems do. Even when you work with finance systems, they always make numbers go up and down. I'm never going to get a job at a finance company now. You have order confirmed, so you know that a financial transaction has taken place and you have that confirmation stored, but maybe you need to update some logging system and then some sort of audit trail, but you can't do the audit trail until the logging system has been updated. So the sequence there would be very it would be vital that they happen in the right order, whereas they are unrelated to the user's order confirmation email going out, so we don't care which one goes first there. That's my butchered version of what the author is trying to say there. And they've got a diagram. Okay, that's way more useful. Okay, so order created event handler. Okay, so this is put new order notifications sent to customer event, sent to customer, and new order notifications sent to shop manager. So it's grouping those as one, putting one event handler over like messaging. In my example, I was saying that they're potentially unrelated, but this is grouping those together. And that's because they're being done by the same handler. So this is, hey, I've created an event, I've created an order, and that's created an event, and I'm going to process these together. Whereas these could be done separately. Yep, same process here. So this is the CRM. Yeah, I'm just looking at these events. These domains are sending their own, creating their own events as well. So you can have that kind of cascading, one affects the other. Oh, and this is the example we were talking about earlier, where you just don't care. Like they can just be handled in their own domains. So these are all diagrams of options that you have. Like you'd need to base this on whatever you wanted to do. So an events bus is how you're going to. So when you say order completed and create an event, where does that event live while the listeners are waiting to pick it up and do something to it, or are in the process of doing that? So here, these are different types of that. Where you post it to is the event bus. So the bus is like the queue of events that are waiting to get processed. Synchronous, asynchronous, external, and logger. It is not uncommon for applications to take advantage of a few, if not all, kinds of event buses presented above. Refactoring monoliths is like auditing and logging. Even though I'm kind of skipping over these types of things, but like each one of these would have a different advantage. So synchronous could be just within your application. Async, you just need to queue it somewhere. So like sticking something in Redis or something. Like, yeah, Sidekick would do that. External would be, in my mind, external would be good for external services. So you're going to shove it in a queue system, and then an entirely other service or application or something is going to pick events off. So you could have a different, it could be a different Rails app. It could be anything. You're just posting out being like, hey, I've done this thing. This order's been completed. And then there are lots of queuing systems available. But it could also just be like, it could be like a table in your database, like sort of use the same pattern, but build your own. So special uses, I wanted to just go down to costs and risks. Requiring mindset change. Yeah, that's totally worth mentioning if people aren't familiar with the pattern or are unfamiliar with the additional complexity it can add. Correlations, visibility, that's what we mentioned earlier, I assume, which is like, hey, you don't actually know what's going to happen after this. Inflexibilities and changing payload structure, so that's something might want to build in from the get-go. Plan events and their payloads carefully to maintain an adequate set of both unit and integration tests. Because effectively, like you're creating it, even if the consumption of the payload is internal, it's still you're basically making a promise, like an API for what's going to be received. Okay, here. So this is so then like okay, well, what's a good example of this? So I looked at the Whisper gem, which I've used before for this, and had a good experience with. So this is I didn't sort of really get this far through reading this in the quick time that I was looking at it before this stream. So let's take a look. The code presented below is a sort of oversimplification. Well, that's what we're generally doing on the stream. Code generated event. So this is going to generate some sort of code. So we're saying, hey, here's some new events. And this is testing the payload of some that's presumably being validated. Yeah. So it needs all 3 fields to be valid. And this defines the type of those attributes. Okay. Then we've got a set pin codes for upcoming reservations. Cross locks code generated. So this is testing that the code under test, once it does the thing that it is being asked to do, this is some sort of like service object or something that responds to call. You say, here, I have this reservation, and it's saying, hey, when this thing does its thing, when we call it, it should take, based on everything it's been given, generate it should broadcast an event. And broadcast is part of the Whisper API. And like I mentioned that you don't have to use the word broadcast, but that's just the one the Whisper gem uses, I think. So that's a test for it, and then this is the this is that code. So this is some sort of so they're making it explicitly a service object. I'm assuming pattern service is their own internal class. I don't know if that's a gem or something, or if there's anything. Actually, don't know if there's something built in that defines pattern service. It takes a reservation, does stuff, and when it does the stuff, it broadcasts that the thing has happened. And then we check that it gets subscribed to. So subscribe is the other half of you broadcast, but then you have your listeners are subscribed. So you're saying this class is subscribed to this event. And within that, it has a method. I've forgotten all of this. So once you call subscribe on it, you need a method of the corresponding name. I actually wonder if you can pass a different method name. So for this event, call this method. I'm not sure. But it's looking for a method of that name, and it passes through. So this event data will be the payload from the event, okay? And then you can define what to do with it. So here it's defining a new handler. I don't think this is required by Whisper. I think this is just the specific implementation here, and it's just passing that through to a handler. Because you could work on it here, and then the handler is not doing anything, which is fine. Then domain event handler. Oh, that inherits. Okay, so that inherits from a domain event handler. So this is in GRM, and this one's in CRM. Okay, so this one does nothing. And then this one does... What's code generate handler? Is this just a different example of something that does do something? So this one... Creates a reservation, passes the event data, stubs out, allows super GRM client. What's GRM? I know that this is probably domain specific to what they do. On the GRM. Oh, guest relationship management. Okay, cool. Okay, so that is specific to this thing. Okay, so guest relationship management. So it goes out to the GRM. So we have a reservation, have some event data. We stub this thing out. So we create the handler, pass in that event data and call. And we think that that event handler, when past this event, should call the GRM system with the relevant fields. And then that's all this actually does. And then that's what gets called. Cool. Okay, that all makes sense. So let's go and look. So Whisper is over here if you want to take a look at it. This hasn't been touched in a really long time, but I'm sort of assuming this falls under the heading that we've touched on when we've looked at gems before, in that, like, it ain't broke. So I used this a while ago, and I took a look, and there actually is a note here. For Greenfield applications, you might be interested in Whisper next. So this is being worked on. So there are more recent commits here, but also I wonder how many people are using this, you know, and it's just working. So why, you know, you don't need to commit to it if it's working. We didn't have any issues with it. I remember reading a few bugs around like really specific implementation things, and they got fixed. But in general, I've used this in production and it performed as we expected. There are other things that this is just from a quick Google around. So this is Rails event store. So this is a pub sub bus that we talked about. And this is all of the fun things that you can do. And these people are using it. I didn't really look through it much more than that. That you can do what we just described with it, which is great. So take a look at that one as well. And then you can also build your own. So you don't need to use an off-the-shelf service for this. You can, this is request store, where you can put things on a per event basis just to store, hey, these are the things that the events I'm storing, and these are the listeners for these classes. So if this class gets this event, then call these listeners, and all of that fun stuff. Here we go. Other recommendations. Use bang methods a lot and let stuff fail in runtime the correct way. Adhering to this rule benefits it the most in the context of active record finders. Use external system IDs if those are unique. Consider maintaining a clear separation of domains, regardless of the technique used, be it dependency injection, decorators, or even CBRA/Packwork. Packwork is the Shopify domain separation gem thing. Try to introduce interface segregation for model subjects that might share the same database table but are used in different domain contexts. So up here, I think there were just name spacing stuff. That might be enough. But maybe you want to go further than that. Asking yourself the following question: if I remove this whole domain from the application, will it still work? It can help you decide on whether it needs to be in more isolation. So that's the whole of that article, and this does a really good job. So I've put a link to it in the YouTube video description, and this is something that if you start to scale up your, hey, we want to do stuff based on user interaction, like send them emails or send them an email and fire their data into a CRM system or something like that, you are bound to bump into this type of pattern, because you will swiftly bump into the limits of, hey, we have classes that we call this method on, or we just straight up call a mailer or something like that. And this can be a cool place to sort of skate to the end of. We could implement Whisper for this. We actually don't really need to. All of the caveats that author gave was like, hey, if you don't have a complex system, don't do anything complex. We could just do this. In fact, we don't even need the later part, because I don't think we have any kind of active job implementation in there. So I'm not even sure we could use deliver later, because we don't have one. So maybe this is all we would be able to put in this kind of like proof of concept app that we're working on at the moment. But I sort of know where we're likely to head with the idea of having orders confirmed potentially in a couple of places, or maybe we do end up calling out an order confirmer, but it doesn't do it doesn't handle the emails and stuff, and we call the broadcast call from the order confirmer. So we do have a single place where that thing happens, but that thing is called from multiple places, like the admin area or this controller method. And again, if we had order confirmer, it probably wouldn't wouldn't be here. It would probably just be the thing that the controller called, and we're just skipping over a bunch of steps in between where we are and what I'm trying to describe. But I think it's useful. I'm hoping this is useful to talk about. All right, let's do the other fun thing I wanted to talk about just for a second before we come back here. So we're gonna come back to this, but the thing I wanted to do was Rails Jam local email. Which one of these is the one that gives you the fake inbox? Because that's the one that I love. I think a couple did. I can't remember, but I want that. And I mean like the one in the web browser. Should have looked at what this one actually is. I just clicked on the first. This is not the thing, I think. Want like email browser letter opener, render received email in browser. So I've definitely used letter opener before. Letter opener web, maybe that's the one I'm thinking of. Does letter opener have a launch eaters open sent emails in the browser. Mail trap or mail catcher, these are all ringing bells. Okay, so I think mail trap is a full service that's doing proper fancy stuff. Testing things. Okay, I've looked at that, but I can't remember why. Mail catcher is a super simple SMTP server which catches. Okay, so this is one that has like a little fake mailer email client, which I love. Maybe this one does the same thing. Let's open a web, herokuapp.com. Click here to see sent emails. Oh, and then can we send a test one? Okay, so test at example.com. Oh, subject. Other test. Send mail. Okay, that's pretty cool. I'm so easily pleased in the world. So if you get this letter opener web, do you also get letter opener? And this is just a config. Make sure you have letter opener delivery method configured for your app. That running. Because I think what letter opener does from memory is just pop it open in a new tab, which can actually be really kind of annoying if you're doing a thing where you're not doing anything related to emails and they sort of open in a new tab. I'm just looking to see if they have an option within the actual gem itself. So it stores them here. And then it uses Launchy to open them. So maybe you can configure it to do something else. Let an opener user launches a sent mail in the browser. It assumes the Ruby process is running on the local development machine. Using a separate staging server or VM, this will not working. Consider mail catcher. Okay, so is letter opener web? I'm assuming from the gem spec that like, does it just pull in? Oops, wrong one. Does it just pull in letter opener? Yeah, so action mailer, letter opener, a bunch of stuff. Okay, cool. And then what does it do? Looks to see where they are. Config. Adds a custom delivery method. We talked about that last week. Interesting. So this is the delivery method. Okay, cool. And where's the actual, like, I guess it must be an app. So this looks at the location that we looked at in config just then. And we say, here's a bunch of stuff that it can get from each file in there. Cool. And so in the views, is it just iterating over all of those? Oh, interesting. Okay, let's install this because I love the idea of this. We want to do this. So we only want to put it in development. Okay, and then we add to your roots, mount letter opener web engine. Just gonna add that whole thing to our roots. Be right at the top. For no particular reason, I guess it could go right at the bottom. It doesn't matter. And make sure you have letter opener delivery method configured in your app. Okay, so we looked at the delivery method last week because, actually, let me move the thing here. Because, and I think it's one of the things that we still have from last week, is we changed a bunch of stuff in here. So in Action Mailer, we built our SMTP settings based on these private credentials, encrypted credentials, and we needed to raise the delivery errors because this wasn't working, and then we got that working. But all of it was based on the fact that the delivery method is SMTP. So Rails then knows to use all of these deets and actually try and send the email. So we're going to change that to letter opener based on these docs that we've just been in. And then this is the path we want. So then we fire our app up. We can go to our local server. This worked, and what did we were doing like password resets, weren't we? So this is, I'm logged in here. Oh, I wanted to update my email address. So this was what was sending the email. So this now won't send it via MailJet based on the fact that I've just changed that provider, but we do want whatever that new, just lost it. It's not that one, not that one. It is this. Okay, so this is us. So because we've installed the gem and installed that those roots, we now have this new thing, this new service, and it's a fake inbox for our app. And so now when we say hello at example.com. And we send that. Oh, so we do still get the pop-up as well. So that's opened in a new tab. So if I refresh this, and we do get it in here. Right, how do we get it to not pop up as well? I actually only want it to come in here. So what happened there is I went to edit my email address, and devise, which we looked at last week, will trigger a new email address at that point. But it opened the email in a new tab, and it opened, and it created a new record in our web interface. I don't want that to pop up. So how do we configure that? Because it's super useful to have that if you want it. If you're running it from Vagrant, you might want to skip that. It was launch equals. Yes, here we go. So if you just want to browse mails using the web interface and don't care about emails opening in Automata, you can set letter opener web as your delivery method, which is exactly what I want. So we can kill that server, go back into here and do this. So letter opener will do both. Letter opener web will only do the other ones. We can do this again. We can actually delete that email. Okay, and that's going to delete the file, the temp file that generated. And so we can go back in, and this time, because we've configured it differently, we can say like 123 at test.com. Doesn't matter what we put in here. Update that email address. We get no behavior to indicate an email has been sent. Again, we could then toggle this based on the developer experience that we wanted. We could turn that on if we wanted it to, but then we refresh in here and we have this. So you could sort of be working on email formatting, for example, and just want to check that your formatting changes were coming through, but having the tab open every time, I find one of the things I find slightly annoying about that is like, depending on how your browser is configured, it can still focus from what you're trying to type and a bunch of stuff like that. You might also have emails being sent via a background job, so your development environment might be behaving differently based on that. So there could be ones that were like, hey, send this email in a minute or something, and then a minute later your background job could be getting processed locally, and then they fire up and the tab opens and it steals your focus. There's a bunch of stuff that can happen. So I actually don't mind, unless I specifically want, hey, please open this email, to have it appear like this, and I can refresh the list, and it will all work. So this one is our order confirmation that comes from devise. What we can presumably do is also open up a console tab and do what we did last week and check that we get, it's like order mailer, check it and break this earlier, dot order confirmation dot deliver, I think it is. This was from last week. Yep, and so in here, if we then refresh, great. So we now have our email here. So let's say we're working on this. Can we do this in real time? So let's say we have order confirmed. And in here, we want to put, we'll just put test update in here. So we're working on our content for our email, for example, or our formatting. So now I've changed that template, and I want to come back in here and resend that. I can refresh this. I get a new version. Ah, damn it! It doesn't work for local content changes. Do I have to kill the server and restart it to get that change recognized? So this should say order confirmed test update if it had processed the change to the template to the view. Unless that's this, unless that's my sending. So if I do reload here and do it, yes. Okay, great. Okay, so I could instead just, well, I mean, I'm just triggering it from the console, but we could do that and have that always be the correct one. Clear this list out, and then, oops. Your order is confirmed. You just keep saying the same thing. But again, then when we call in here, because we've called reload here, it's this code that was getting cached. It wasn't a byproduct of, from the console, I mean. It wasn't a byproduct of using the mailer web, letter opener web. So we reload that, check here, refresh, and we get this new content. So yeah, we could work really neatly on our email layout, HTML coding, all of that fun stuff, and just be in this fake inbox, which is pretty cool. And similar to this, I'm not going to explore this because we've kind of nailed it, but this is an external service which sets up a separate listener. So you could actually buy the SMTP emails, and then this would actually catch them and then render them. Whereas here we're creating, this is just a temp file within our apps directory structure that's being looked at, and we could see that earlier when we were looking at the gems code. All right, so that is, I'm gonna actually commit that because I like this gem. So that's gonna stay, and then we can have install. I'll just do that quickly. And we're gonna have install letter in a web gem. Is that what it's called? Yeah, I should just put this. And I'm not even going to put a comment on that because the name of the gem almost definitely defines what it does. And then in here, oh no. I'm kind of happy for that to go in the previous commit really, but whatever. So all those SMTP details, we want to move to the staging and production ones. We only want this one in here actually. So we could do stage selected ranges. We don't need to put those SMTP details in there yet because that's just for, and then in here, add config for I don't really need to say a lot here. Like I don't know if any future engineer would struggle to work out what is happening here. They could all go in the same commit, frankly. It's a gem that does a very specific thing, and the config is very obvious, so we could just collapse those commits down. All right, cool. So we now have, from top to bottom, if you look at the last couple of streams, a fairly robust or like standard email delivery development story. So locally, we now have this letter opener web gem. So we have two options for our delivery method that we can define in here. So we've added letter opener web that puts them in our little web-based email client browser thingy. Great. We then can just change that to letter opener where they will appear in that web browser email client if we wanted to, but we'll also open a new tab with the content of the email. Great. And then what we also have is our encrypted credentials for our actual SMTP details for a real third-party provider that really will send emails. And what we can then do is start to build the other environments config. So this is for development. We don't need these in here. So this could actually go because we're not using the SMTP settings in here. This instead could go and live in production or staging or something like that. So if you remember, staging would be used by our review apps for Heroku that we were looking at a few weeks ago. So if we had staging details in there, we could have a specific ESP account for staging, or we could use the same account with a different API key. Loads of options. And so this could all go and live. Where's the action mailer stuff? Here. That's what we would need. And we set up our credentials in a file called credentials.yaml, but this is possible on a per environment basis. So when we were looking at like Rails credentials edit or whatever the command was, you could put -- development -- staging or whatever you needed to do. So we have set these for production. I guess the default one is just credentials would just be production. I'm assuming you could call it production if you wanted to. So maybe we would create a new set of credentials for staging maybe create a different API key for that or something like that. And then this call doesn't need to change as I understand it. Again, this is sort of my first use of those encrypted credentials. This call doesn't need to change because it knows the appropriate credentials to use based on the environment of Rails that Rails thinks it's in. So again, that's just all admin that we need to do, but totally exists. So we now can test our emails, send them, and when they will actually deliver on development and production and staging with a little bit of config. That's it. We're over an hour, so that is all I'm really going to touch on today. We haven't actually passed any information through to the emails. Like, it doesn't actually send any stuff through. It doesn't send any order details through and put it in the template, but that's all sort of like Rails-y basic-y stuff, so we can get to that. So what do we want to look at? What do we want to move on to? So I feel like we've really got our email story top to bottom, T to B done. And we actually have a domain, we have hosting, we have emails. Is there anything left on our infrastructure stuff? Do we want to... I mentioned earlier that we don't sort of have an active job story. Like, we don't have anything configured to that, I don't think. Maybe, did we put in delayed job? No. Or does Rails come with a default one turned on? No, so maybe we want a queue because we could use that for our emails. Maybe that's not overly interesting because it's not like it's sort of built into Rails. Delayed job. They all have a kind of an active job API as I understand it, and all you're really changing is under the hood. And I think we might be constrained in that. I think active job will create a table on the database that it polls rather than using Sidekick, using Redis, which I think something like Sidekick would do. And maybe we don't want to use Redis because I can't remember what free allocation we get with those providers, those hosting providers we were looking at. So at least if we use delayed job, we're just looking at the database table. So just for our kind of free proof of concept app, maybe delayed job is our best bet. Yeah, maybe that's useful to configure. Maybe not. If you have any thoughts on what else you sort of want to look at, or maybe we should just sort of progress with actually moving the app forward and tidying up the UI and stuff like that. I'll give that some thought before next week. But other than that, I'm going to go and try and escape from the heat somewhere. I hope this fan hasn't been too noisy. I really appreciate it having it on. And yeah, let's wrap it up. Let's go and enjoy a British sunshiny weekend. Have a wonderful weekend wherever you are in the world. Enjoy yourself, and I will see you, if not before, then next Sunday at 10:30 a.m. UK time for another edition of Sunday Club. I was just thinking if I was away next week, but no, I think I'm here. Have a lovely weekend.